welcome back. Of course, let's go on to part two. And of course, back in 1997, and of course in late that year, the Knights won their first ever premiership against Manly. And of course, a parade was held 2 days later.
Tough football but little scoring in the first 40 minutes at Harker Oval. The crowd treated to plenty of enterprising raids, but only 2 points from the boot of Scott Bradley. It wasn't long after the resumption that the Rosellas extended their lead, the Bulldogs' defence crumbling under the strength of Tim Blassack. 6-0, Les Smith put a solo effort on of his own, the Western Suburb centre at his elusive best for the local second try. When Brett Cullen crossed, the match was out of reach for Curry. Chris Wells then rubbing it in and earning an early shower for the effort. Westmead Lakes next weekend for a berth in the competition decider. Local league officials went behind closed doors moments ago to thrash out an alternative plan for the NRL Grand Final. It's set down for September 7. However, if the Knights make the top three, they'll play on the same afternoon, and the NRL has stated it won't go head-to-head. While it all depends on the last 2 rounds of the ARL, it's understood a Friday or Saturday night local league Grand Final is the preferred option. Confusion still reigns in the Group 21 Rugby League competition after the Supreme Court suspended play because Muswellbrook fielded an unregistered player earlier in the season. When Aberdeen lost to Singleton in the minor semi-final, it lodged the complaint, saying the oversight cost them second place on the ladder and they should have competed in the major semi-final. Now Group 21 has suggested those results to be made null and void and all games be replayed. It would mean that Aberdeen will play the major semi-final against Denman, while Muswellbrook will drop back for a minor semi-final clash against Singleton. Reserve grade is also affected. Aberdeen would meet Singleton in the minor semi, while Denman would play Scone in the major semi-final. The Group 21 plan will be put into action, but only if Aberdeen agrees. Otherwise, it's back to court. On a more positive note, the Central Coast finals have started without a hitch. Gosford won the minor semi by beating Erina 20 points to 18. Jonathan Upton, NBN News. The Knights may be running into end-of-season form, however, player availability is way from 100%. In announcing his team for this weekend's clash with Souths, Malcolm Reilly has bracketed several of the forwards together as Mark Glanville tries to overcome his neck injury.
With the nature of Mark's injury, I find it difficult to believe that he could recover in such a short period of time, but he's saying the right things, so we'll just have to wait and see.
Newcastle's win on the weekend and North's loss to Wests has given the Knights a real chance of making the top three, although players and staff alike play down the importance of the double chance.
I think the team that wins is not going to lose a game between now and the end of the season, so therefore, it'd be good to have 2 bites of the cherry, so to speak, but I think we're going to lose one anyway, so...
With the end of the season is also coming player contract negotiations. According to the Knights, all are proceeding well, including those with the Johns brothers.
We're confident that we'll be able to secure them.
Meantime, a beaten and battered Hunter side has returned after that loss to Brisbane. Several injuries have forced changes to the team that will play its final Australasian Super League match against Cronulla. The game will be the last on Newcastle turf for veteran Robbie McCormack. Moth is hoping to pursue a career in England. After a loss to Townsville on Saturday, the Falcons threw away their early chances again overnight. The Tigers' Marcus Timmins making no mistakes. But Falcons coach Sean Dennis still braved a smile until Mark Brakey wiped it off. Tony Jensen kept the visitors in it, but Brakey helped the Tigers take a 64-51 lead to the main break. Not as much cheering when Newcastle found its mark. David Simmons for 2. Big Ben Pepper also timed in. But the Falcons' efforts were overshadowed by the flair of Marcus Timmins and Leonard Copeland's magic on the buzzer of three-quarter time. Melbourne was celebrating already. Newcastle's mistakes at the start of the 4th term made certain the party wasn't premature. The locals online for their 5th consecutive victory. It was another night Newcastle would rather forget. Leonard Copeland racing to a personal haul of 29. Fellow guard Andrew Gaze matching his efforts as the Tigers won by 21. Newcastle is now the rank outsider to win the NBL. The Falcons' latest quote, 330-1. Jonathan Upton, NBN News. The Wildfires took time out to visit sick kids in Newcastle today. Half a dozen players made the trip to John Hunter Hospital, sending good wishes, a message echoed. The Wildfires play Eastwood at the #1 sports ground in the final home game of the season, the visitors sitting in second place on the ladder.
You know, Eastwood have got a lot to play for, and they would have got a jolt last week getting beaten, so they'll be well and truly focused. But they are a team we haven't beaten since we come into the Sydney comp, and it'll be nice to roll them home in the last home game.
Newcastle has been forced to make changes to the team that was narrowly beaten by Gordon, injuries and suspensions taking their toll. In the NRU, Singleton plays Maitland in the major semi-final, while it's sudden death for the Waratahs and Merewether Carlton. Tars entered the match after a comprehensive 16-point victory over Wanderers at the #2 sports ground. Finals continue also in the NBN Soccer League. Out of the form, Edgeworth tackles Western in the elimination minor semi-final, while a berth in the grand final awaits either Broadmeadow or Highfields. And the Newcastle Breakers have announced coaches for the club's inaugural year in the National Youth League. Among the highlights, the appointment of former Socceroo and Adamstown Rosebud coach Graham Jennings. Jonathan Upton, NBN News. After last weekend's narrow loss to Gordon, the Wildfires were hoping for much of the same against Eastwood at the #1 sports ground, the locals starting the match with plenty of confidence. However, the Woods' defence stood strong. Hoping to secure a berth in the competition top 3, the visitors then found plenty in attack, captain Adam Leach helping Eastwood to a 5-0 lead. No mistakes from in front and the tourists extended their lead before Newcastle was presented with a chance to bring the score back to 7-3. Eastwood threatened to run away with the game until the Wildfires' determined defence scrambled to hold them out, the locals then replying with a backline effort of their own, but poor finishing let them down. Mistakes were costing Newcastle dearly. The visitors treated to plenty of first-half possession. Winger Scott Standerforth made the most of it, racing down the far touchline for the Woods' second try. 12-3, only the goalpost saved the Wildfires from trailing by another 2 points. But when Andrew James slipped through some sloppy defence, the Wildfires thought they had their first. The referee disagreed the try overruled because of an incident in back play. It seemed to take the wind out of Newcastle's sails. No goalpost problems this time around for Nathan Spooner. And with the Eastwood pack dominating up the middle, the visitors held on to the lead, the Wildfires failing to come back. Newcastle is quickly becoming the hardest team to catch in the NBL, given little chance of beating Perth. The Falcons hit back at the critics. Butch Hayes was instrumental in Newcastle's early charge, while David Van Dyke returned to familiar ground. Ben Pepper chipped in thanks to Tony Jensen, and the Boomer landed several himself to give the locals a narrow lead at the main break. Butch Hayes was ruthless in the second half. The Falcons captain brought everyone to their feet with an outstanding individual performance, plenty of personal points, and just as many assists. Perth, though, remained in it, thanks largely to Ricky Grace, until Hayes won the match for Newcastle, landing 2 free throws in the dying seconds for a thrilling 3-point win.
Newcastle has hit form at the right time of the season, and the word around the club is that this year might be the one. In the countdown to the Illawarra game, all is okay in the Knights camp. Adam Muir will play despite missing today's training with a minor foot complaint. However, the news from Wollongong isn't as good for the Steelers. Talented halfback Glenn Eyre was due to return for the Steel City clash, but doctors have ruled otherwise.
Might be a previous injury, I'm not sure, but it's just filled up a little bit, a bit of fluid, and couldn't fully extend it, so it was no use playing.
With Eyre out, the Steelers will field the same team that ended Parramatta's dream run last weekend.
They'd be confident, especially playing at their home ground, but we're confident. We're playing really well over the last month, and we continue on the same way, and I don't think we'll have any problems.
Illawarra agrees it faces a tough assignment. Coach Andrew Farrow, the first to concede the Knights have plenty to offer.
Well, actually, I think they're going to be harder than Parramatta. I've looked at their last couple of games, and they are very awesome. Right across the park, from the Johns brothers jumping around to their very strong forwards.
One forward set to get quite a reception is Wayne Richards. The Knights' workhorse returns to his former home ground.
Oh, for sure. So I don't know what I'll get. I don't know if I'll get a cheer or a boo or what will happen. So we'll just wait and see.
NBN's replay of the match, 4 o'clock Sunday afternoon.
Despite Newcastle securing a victorious win over Illawarra, it was huge for the Knights. And of course it had to be. And of course the Knights scored a lot of tries up and right up on the south coast.
Newcastle jumped into equal third position on the ARL ladder after yesterday's win over the Gold Coast, and while they're assured of a berth in the finals, the Chargers' chances are slipping.
You know, the odds are certainly getting stacked against us. You know, the more games we lose, that's the first time this year we've lost 3 in a row, and it doesn't get any easier.
The Gold Coast coach isn't wrong. The Chargers face Manly and Illawarra in the final 2 rounds, knowing their defence will have to improve if they're to make the finals.
Our defence over the last few weeks has been terrible, and if we're going to make the finals, we've got to be up the scratch with our defence.
It was a tune echoed in the Knights camp. The win pushed Newcastle into joint third place with Norths, and with both sides determined to clinch the double chance in the semis, that prized place may come down to for and against. Yesterday, Newcastle won by 26, although everyone agrees the margin could have been even bigger if the Knights held their intensity for the entire game.
Yeah, imagine if we played for 80 minutes, you know, we'd be bamboozling, so it's like, we know we can score a try, we just got to pick our defence up.
Newcastle coach Malcolm Reilly was critical also of some of the Knights' attack.
We squandered a lot of opportunities out there and took some bad options at times with the ball in our hands and really never subjected them to the amount of pressure we should have done.
And the injury front isn't too bad for either side. The Chargers' Jamie Driscoll has an injured knee, while the Knights all fared well, with the exception of Matthew Gidley. He left reserve grade with ankle damage, but has been cleared of broken bones. Jonathan Upton, NBN News.
As far as Newcastle's concerned, I think the Knights are very well set up to play the game next year as a club. And I would believe that the Knights would be very strong in any mergers, talks or decisions that may have to take place in Newcastle.
With the NRL, with the Rugby League announcing a decision that the Hunter Mariners would not be part of the 1998 competition.
It's been confusion that Group 21 could have done without and all because of an unregistered player oversight earlier in the year. Officials have almost agreed on an outcome. All first and reserve grade finals will be replayed. However, Group 21 wants the series to start this weekend. Aberdeen is pushing for kick-off on Sunday week. A special general meeting at 7 o'clock tonight will focus on the debate. Despite the imminent result, the confusion has come at a cost both on and off the field. If Denman misses the grand final, its financial loss may be about $16,000, while Singleton's reserve grade side has already forfeited its match against Aberdeen due to lack of football. A second bite of the cherry for Aberdeen, but the early signs weren't good. Musselburgh crossed after only 1 minute, but when the Rams' enthusiasm in defence caught the eye of the referee, the Tigers kicked back to trail by 2. The boot came into play again soon after, a chip in general play helping Aberdeen find its first try and a 6-4 lead. A try apiece before the break took the half-time score to 10-all, both sides making the most of sloppy marker defence. The locals hit top gear early in the second half. Aberdeen had the visitors stretched to the limit and Musselburgh crumbled before another stretching effort at the other end of the park earned an identical result. 14-all. Musselburgh then had this for a 16-14 victory and a berth in the grand final. Souths entered this afternoon's match at Broadmeadow with a 5-point buffer on the ladder and with a chance of tightening its grip on the minor premiership, and it couldn't have been a better start. The opening goal came after only 3 minutes. A spectacular uni save, the only thing holding out another goal soon after. It was a comprehensive performance from the title favourites. They extend their lead in the premiership. Meantime, a tough opening half in the women's A Division clash between Novo's 2 and Oxford's 1, with both sides scoreless in the first 30 minutes. The second term started in much the same vein, although as the match wore on, Oxford's looked set to stamp its authority. A series of short corners late in the match presented the red and whites with several opportunities, but Novo's amazingly held on to escape with a 0-0 draw.
The Knights team reads like a hospital waiting list. Grogan, Matthew Johns, Glanville, Muir and Harrigan all in doubt for Sunday's showdown. The chief is battling a recurring back problem and won't train until Friday.
But hopefully by then plenty of pool work and physio, it'll pull up a lot fine. I'm really keen to play this weekend.
The Knights will need all its crew on deck, the team needing to win its last 3 games to have any chance of finishing in the top 3.
Oh, they're going to be fired up. It's going to be a very competitive game. I think Balmain will be the same. Obviously, they're poised to get into a final position, and so both games are going to be crucial, and both teams have everything to play for.
It's do or die for the Hunter Mariners this weekend after going down to the Perth Reds. The team has a near impossible task of downing the Broncos at home to keep its faint finals hopes alive. Meanwhile, coach Graham Murray is playing down claims by Noel Goldthorpe that he hasn't talked to the halfback since dropping him to reserve grade.
I've spoken to Noel why he's not in the team, but then if he wants more information, I guess it's my understanding is it's always been the player then approaches the coach.
The Newcastle Knights were working on moves today to ensure they don't become their own worst enemies by giving away points to the Chargers. That's how coach Malcolm really saw his team's defeat at the hands of the Gold Coast back in May. But the stakes are higher now with only 3 more matches deciding the year.
Oh, they're going to be fired up. It's going to be a very competitive game. I think Balmain will be the same. Obviously, they're poised to get into a final position, and so both games are going to be crucial, and both teams have everything to play for.
It's a big task down at Newcastle Marathon Stadium. They'll be out trying to avenge their last round loss to us. That was probably the biggest upset of the season to date. We beat them quite convincingly that night.
The Knights line-up stands despite injury worries over Matthew Johns, Adam Muir, Harrigan, Glanville and Brett Grogan, who limped into training with leg and shoulder pain.
I've missed out on much, so there's no way I'm going to miss out on the home game.
It's obvious the opposition's done their homework on our halfback combination, in particular Wes Patton, and they worked on ways to shut him down and out of the play. So Tommy O'Reilly's come in at halfback this week, and Keith Blackett's come to 5'8".
The game kicks off at 3 p.m. on Sunday at Marathon Stadium. There's no room for complacency against a struggling North, which is still capable of pulling off an upset win. The Wildfires remain equal 8th on the ladder, but a place in the top 5 is a possibility. They'll field an unchanged side against North with Stuart Jones on the injured list and Danny Mayava to again captain the side. The club is expecting a formidable North turnout in reserve grade and Colts, but nonetheless hopes for a clean sweep. Meanwhile, the Newcastle Rugby League moves into the qualifying semi-final round of the Tooheys Cup Series at Harker Oval tonight. Curry Workers fielding teams in all grades, with the main game kicking off at 8:30 against West. Saturday sees the semi-final elimination rounds between South Newcastle and Maitland in the first grade and under-20s, while Lakes and Central meet up in the reserve grade. And in the NBN Soccer League, the final 5 placings are in the balance, with the match of the round between Hamilton and Edgeworth on Sunday.
A golden presentation kicked off proceedings last night. The Falcons' young guns rewarded for their efforts with the Baby Boomers before showing their appreciation on the court. Simon Dwight's medal didn't hold him down for Canberra, but the Australian forward's early form also earned close attention from David Simmons. Down, but as yet not out, Butch Hayes joined Ben Melmoth to add to the Cannons' woes. Everyone contributing as Newcastle raced away to an 8-point quarter-time lead. The Falcons were clearly the better side, and while the early alley-oops went astray, nothing could fault the locals' second attempt or Canberra's immediate reply. Newcastle increased its lead to 13 at the main break before returning an even better performance in the third term. The Cannons completely outgunned as the Falcons looked home and hosed. But it almost slipped away. Canberra clawed its way back at one stage, reducing the deficit to just 2 points. Ben Pepper then stepping up to save the day for Newcastle, the Falcons up by 12. A blackout at Townsend Oval delayed kick-off in the elimination semi-final, but Light brought with it a powerful Maitland defence. However, the Pumpkin Pickers' enthusiasm cost them the opening 2 points of the match. Maitland levelled with a kick of its own before the Lions took the running approach, Adrian McNabb darting out of dummy half for the first 4-pointer. Another penalty for the visitors brought it back to a 4-point ball game, but Souths replied soon after, running the ball on the last tackle for the perfect result. 12-4, and with only seconds left in the first 40 minutes, Souths ran in its third try for a comfortable half-time lead. Maitland had to score first in the second term. They did, the pumpkin pickers crossing through Matt Lockwood. But the visitors' headaches were to continue. Brendan Lantry came off second best from this. Their chances of bouncing back then dropping away with poor handling. And when Darren Forward showed how it should be done at the other end of the park, the result was sealed. 22-8 Souths on top, but the Lions face sudden death football again next weekend in the clash with Curry. In soccer, Broadmeadow has claimed its first NBN League premiership by beating Toronto this afternoon at Lyle Peacock Oval. With other sides breathing down their necks, the Magic needed to win to guarantee the crown. Chris Akevsky gave them the edge after 20 minutes. Another goal before the break put Broadmeadow right in control. Andrew Tonks dealing with the scraps from point blank. The Stags never came back, the Magic winning 3-0 for their first title since entering the competition in 1965. Meantime, in other final round results, wins for Highfields, Western, Hamilton and Wallsend, and on the ladder, Broadmeadow finished the premiership only 1 point in advance of Highfields. Western's win today pushes them into the top 5, while Belmont Swansea comprehensively won the wooden spoon.
Robbie McCormack started with the Knights a decade ago as a centre. He switched to the scrum, opening up a representative career. The Moth played for Country in New South Wales, but most of his highlights came in the blue and red of the Knights.
I think one of the other big ones was semi-final series down in Sydney, when we had there was about 15 or 20,000 Novocastrians down there following us, and to run out in the SFS and have these red and blue flags everywhere was a great feeling.
After 154 games for the Knights, McCormack jumped ship to Super League, becoming the Mariners' first club captain.
It's been good. It's been a nice change. I think I need a bit of a change, and it's it's been helpful for me in the game, and I've just had good fun, just enjoyed it more. So it's been a bonus.
The Mariners have prepared a special send-off for one of Newcastle's favourite sons, including thousands of Robbie McCormack masks to be worn by the crowd.
It's a big part of my life over. I suppose you never really want it then, but the day comes around and you got to make a decision, and I think it's been coming, and I think it's the best decision to make.
Robbie hopes to finish his career with a club in England before returning to Newcastle. Richard O'Leary, NBN News.
Lakes United ended up doing everything. It was right up in the Newcastle Rugby League final series. They had to do everything. It was right up against their rivals, but they just could not do it. Edgeworth was on its first ever one, and it was in their first finals appearance of the NBN Soccer League. Also, they had good chances, but however, they had the good task of kicking the ball. And because of it, they had to wait.
It's not the place a footballer wants to be Monday morning, but Paul Harrigan had no choice. Chiefs started what will be a long week of physiotherapy on a lower back strain.
I don't know how I done it. I just come out of a scrum and felt like a mass pain in the bottom of my spine there, so I come off.
It's a similar injury to one the Newcastle captain had earlier this year, and while it's touch and go at the moment, Chief wants to play the Gold Coast on Sunday.
Yeah, plenty of physio and plenty of work in the pool and all that type of stuff. But I'm real keen on playing against the Gold Coast. I think it'll be a good game at home, and we're on a bit of a roll, and I think it's important to keep the form up and the fitness up going in the semis.
No such problems for the rest of the side after the Knights inched closer to the finals, and with the last 3 games against Gold Coast, Souths and Balmain, sights are firmly set on the top 3.
Our focus is on improving, regardless of who we play. We need to consistently play well and take that sort of form and momentum into the semi-finals.
The Knights concede the effort against Illawarra was far from their best.
To come away with the 2 points and still not play to our best is certainly a good thing to do.
It's not the only positive the side will take from the game. Among other highlights, the great form of Brett Clements.
Yeah, I'm starting to get used to the pace of the game. It's taken a few games to get used to it, but things are going pretty good, yeah. I'm happy with it.
And Hunter is due to touchdown shortly in Newcastle after yet another loss away from home in Super League. Despite matching Perth in try scoring, the Mariners failed with a boot. The 30-22 loss a reflection of a goal-kicking afternoon they would rather forget. Jonathan Upton, NBN News.
St Edwards at East Gosford hosted the New South Wales final of the Cochrane Cup. The Wagga team scored an early try, although the score was locked at 10-all at half-time. St Michael's then put in a solid performance to clinch the match 17-10.
Yeah, it'll make our bus trip, 6 or 7 hours on the bus, much easier having a win rather than a loss.
Wagga's Joseph Williams was named man of the match after scoring 2 of the 3 tries for St Michael's and 2 conversions.
Means a lot because, like, back at school, the boys will be putting pressure on us and that because they won it last year and won a couple of years before. So we had to win it this year to, like, keep the tradition up, really.
But Wagga's coach didn't single out any one person, attributing the win to every member of the team.
I think that we have a few stars, but in turn I think there's a lot of support players who probably don't get a lot of praise, but do a lot of good work. And I think it's those sort of blokes that make the team and make the side what it is.
The competition was contested by more than 60 teams from 7 regions. Jenny Crouch, NBN News.
It was a match that had to be seen. And of course, Damon quickly got through to the, Damon were quickly on their way to the Group 21 Rugby League Grand Final. And of course, a goal certainly had to be enough. And of course, within a few minutes left on the clock, Denman were back in a good amount of success. Also, Denman were back in the good books on their way to the grand final. The Newcastle Rugby League competition had its own awards, and of course, it was in the Tooheys Cup. And of course, the host was none other than Gary Harley himself.
Rugby League Player of the Year is Graham Hutterstein.
And of course, we're still playing up. And of course, Graham Hutterstein won by 23 votes. He played. Graham Hutterstein, of course, plays for Coe. And of course, for 20 votes, so too does Craig Melliner. He plays for Coe as well. And of course, Ewan McGrady plays for Leeds United. While for 19 votes, Craig Nicholas plays for Waratah. While there are more man of the match awards handed up at the Newcastle Rugby League Awards, it was just massive, which is a really good night. The match between Coe and South Newcastle was of course huge in the Newcastle Rugby League finals. And of course it was an elimination one. Who will go through and who won't. And of course, Coe were the first to score. Then South Newcastle scored back. But with Coe running with the ball, and of course, so too did South Newcastle. South eventually ran with the ball to score. And also to win the game. The Newcastle Wildfires were doing everything they could to secure a win. right up at the Amy Park competition. They had a try first, and of course they had more to score. But their rivals had more. At Marathon Stadium is of course well known for being home of the Newcastle Knights, and of course also the home for interviews as well. Meantime, good news got above for plenty of Newcastle Rugby League teams when they got through to the finals. With Lakes United joining a few clubs into the real NRL. The Knights' win over South Sydney was just massive, and of course Darren Albert ran to quickly score a try for the Knights.
It's a matter of us winning to go on to Madison. So, we'll be out there giving 110% and hopefully coming away with a win.
With the Knights in second, it's a marvellous one. The Knights were doing a lot of great training at the Marathon Stadium this morning. And of course, despite that, it was just huge. And of course, it was another pain in the back for Andrew Johns.
Goddard scampering from dummy half, gives it off to Patton. The charge is dangerous. O'Reilly scores.
And of course, the Knights managed to do a lot of amazing feelings. It's not just the Knights who are training, it's also the Hunter Mariners as well, who are of course in need of a win in their final home game. And of course the Hunter side went down to the Cronulla Sharks in a away game, which is the team that the Hunter needs to beat. With local rugby union continuing, it was huge, and also local rugby league was also starting. But also the final ones also come off, and also they come on as well into the finals. Also, the ones who go through into the finals will also become major premiers. Meantime, it's the Newcastle and Hunter Rugby Union and Newcastle Rugby League finals. Meanwhile, this Saturday, it's the major preliminary final of the Newcastle Rugby Union final between Maitland and Merewether Carlton, while on Sunday it's the minor preliminary final between the Wanderers and the Waratahs. Also, it's the elimination semi-final of the NBN Soccer League, where Hamilton is up against Western, while on Sunday it's the qualifying semi-final with the Highfields up against Edgeworth. The Knights The night CEO was right up at the Cardiff Workers Club, officially ending the deal of the collaboration between the club and the as well as the as well as the pub. Meantime, the Knights, of course, are still into the best playoffs after beating the Rabbitohs with a huge win. And of course, this year is their best one so far. Also, up at the Workers' Club, it's still huge. And also, they've become the best in history. Owen Craigie is one of the best Knights players of all. And of course, he was part of Newcastle's historic win over South Sydney. And of course, the Knights managed to secure a victory to go through to the ARL finals. And of course, Darren Albert managed to run in that game. Also, the Hunter Mariners went down to the Cronulla Sharks. It was just heartbreaking for the club. It was a preliminary final between Merweather as well as the Waratahs. And of course, the Waratahs had a player sent off because of a back chat. And of course, meanwhile, in Newcastle Rules AFL, Warners Bay have secured a win over Newcastle City and are through to the grand final. Also, Cardiff are also through to the grand final after beating Nelson Bay 108 to 72. And of course, Cardiff managed to score and kick a lot of goals as Cardiff made it through to the grand final. The Newcastle Rugby League Grand Final for 1997 was, of course, really good. And of course, Lakes United were hoping to have back-to-back wins. And of course, back-to-back premierships. But however, that all failed. And of course, it was all Western Suburbs go. Then a brawl erupted minutes later before Western Suburbs got away by scoring a try. Then Lakes United scored one as well. Before Western Suburbs continued on the try scoring, with Western Suburbs denying Lakes United the chance to secure back-to-back titles. The good thing about local rugby union is, of course, the exciting thing is finals. And also, because of it, it was just the grand final, that is. And of course, the Waratahs had to take on their rivals. The Knights had an unchanged lineup as part of one of the best matches of all time. And of course, the Knights' first grade side has been launched, with Robbie O'Davis coming in. So too is Darren Albert, Mark Hughes, Owen Craigie, Adam McDougall, and also the Johns brothers, Matthew and Andrew. So too is Leo Denver and Mark Glanville. But also Adam Muir is named as well. So too is Billy Peden. And so too is Paul Harrigan, who is captain. And also Clements. And so too is Tony Butterfield. Meanwhile, Wayne Richards has been named to reserve grade, while Fletcher and Crowe are also on the bench. But of course, Andrew Johns produced one of his magnificent performances right up against every team that the Knights faced. So too did the Knights players, and it was right up at Marathon Stadium.
About 94 teams, the record number of it. Welcome to them too, as Andrew Johns moves in, strikes it pretty well, but it's away to the left.
While on the other side, it was the grand final of the NBN Soccer League. While on the other side, it was the NBN Soccer League, which was marvellous, with goals kicked and scores ready to become a match-winning conversion. And also, surfing quickly got underway at Nobby's Beach with a huge one, and also locals quickly finding it into the water. But also, there was a lot of rugby league action coming above. Lakes United knew how they were disappointed about being denied to be back-to-back champions this year. After being demolished by West in the grand final for Newcastle Rugby League of this year, it was just heartbreaking for the Seagulls. Now the one thing that they have to do is wait till next year. And of course, there's only one thing that the Lakes have already done. Main time, the entrants will take on Gosford in the Central Coast Rugby League Grand Final. And also there's good news up in the Group 21 Rugby League Grand Final. Denman is up against Muswellbrook. Very good ones to play right in the finals of the NBN Soccer League. Goals had to be scored. Lakes United exactly knew what to do to South Newcastle in a preliminary final. And of course, it was to knock them out of the competition. And they certainly did just that. Goals and tries was enough to quickly get them back. Then push and shoves became involved. Both sides of play sent to the bin. Lakes will now tackle West in the grand final. The finals of the NBN Soccer League, of course, still continue on. And of course, because of that, one player was from Deloraine was sent to the bin because of an argument with the referee. Then all the bad stuff broke loose. With the Knights now the only team left in Newcastle, thankfully there was good news in the Newcastle Rugby League competition. With Lakes United meeting their rivals West in the grand final, it was massive after they eliminated South Newcastle in the preliminary final. And of course, Newcastle had to defeat Balmain with a huge victory in the Australian Rugby League. But if the Knights secured a must-needed win, then it was up in the Newcastle Rugby Union finals. Then the NBN Soccer League finals all came to one incredible result. Thousands of locals across Denman were cheering on for their rugby league team as they went through straight to the Group 21 Grand Final. Denman got straight through to the Grand Final. Denman scored first. And of course, Denman managed to win the decider. It was just massive, as Denman became the 1997 Group 21 Rugby League Grand Final champions. Meanwhile, in reserve grade, Denman also defeated Scone 16-13. Also in the under-18s, Muswellbrook annihilated Scone 28-10. No, it's not the Aberdeen Curry clash in the Newcastle Rugby League. It's actually the Newcastle Knights Balmain Tigers clash that occurred at about a week ago. And also, the Knights were still recovering following their 20-4 victory over Balmain. The Knights were still trending above, right in their dressing room, as they got into the finals. And of course, they were getting ready to tackle the big ones, Parramatta, St. George, as well as the Gold Coast. And of course, Matthew Johns, Mark Hughes, as well as Robbie O'Davis were also ready. So too was coach Malcolm Rayleigh. With the Wildfires starting one of their games off, it was just a much more different approach from then till now. And of course, the Wildfires have only lost a few games. Meanwhile, in the Newcastle competition final in the Newcastle Rugby Union final, Singleton are up against the Waratahs. And because of that, the Waratahs managed to outclass Mayweather Carlton in the preliminary final. Meanwhile, in the NBN Soccer League, Broadmeadow will take on Western in the grand final. And of course, Broadmeadow and Western managed to outclass their rivals in the preliminary finals. Meanwhile, Warners Bay and Cardiff will both take on against each other in the Newcastle Wolves AFL Grand Final. The grand final of the NBN Soccer League for 1997 kicked off today. And of course, it was between Broadmeadow and Western. as both teams got through to the grand final by beating their rivals. And of course, despite that, there was of course a lot of there was a lot of failed errors, but thankfully there can only be a winner. Also, there was a few controversies. As all of us were still waiting to who was crowned the NBN Soccer League champions of 1997, and of course we were still waiting. And of course, we all had to quickly know who had to win. And of course, it was for the awards. And of course, the ones who knew it all had to quickly come above. After that match against Parramatta, the Knights are hoping to quickly have a good lineup when they tackle Manly. It was up in a qualifying final that occurred.
That's shortly complicated.
Meanwhile, the Knights have named their lineup. Robbie O'Davis is named, so too is Mark Hughes, as too is Darren Albert, Black Grogan, Owen Craigie, Adam McDougall, as well as the Johns brothers, Matthew and Andrew. And also Mark Granville and Adam Muir and Billy Peden. And also Paul Harrigan, as well as Bill Clements and Tony Butterfield. Meanwhile, the only team that Newcastle can officially defeat now is, of course, the Manly Sea Eagles. Of course, with the Knights' finals season for 1997 becoming the best, and also it's huge. Still not cooperating after that loss to West, right up in the Newcastle Rugby League Grand Final for 97. It was just a really tough one. And of course, that all but denied Lakes United back-to-back. That of course denied Lakes United back-to-back premierships. And of course, that all became, as the players all became workers right off the field. As in the game, players were fighting, and also West were crowned premiers. Meantime, in Central Coast Rugby League, Gosford will join Wyong in the grand final, after both teams eliminated their rivals in their preliminary finals. Malcolm Reilly today named his squad for the Knights' clash against Parramatta in the qualifying final. And of course, he's named O'Davis, Albert, Grogan, Gidley, Craigie, Hughes, McDougall, the Johns brothers, Glanville, Muir, Peden, Harrigan, Clements, and Butterfield. Also, he's dropped Richards and Denevor to the bench.
Sunday after midday.
But that Sunday will be huge, when the Knights take on Parramatta in a minor qualifying final. Also, the Chiefs' performance has been one of the best in Newcastle's history. Score a try for the first time. Also, this year will be Mark Granville's last with the Knights.
Johns. Here's Harrigan again. Harrigan, pops it out the back.
The Knights have gone huge, straight to the finals, and are hoping they can make it through to the big one for the very first time this year.
Jackson. Glanville.
Good news for the Knights. They were still training and celebrating after their historic win over the Parramatta Eels, right up in a qualifying final. And of course, it was up in a minor qualifying final. Huge for the Knights. And of course, Coach Malcolm Reilly was of course impressed with his side's play. The Knights scored a lot of tries, right in both the first and second half of the game. They'll now face Manly in a major semi-final.
Davis is chasing and could land in open space and goes. The Newcastle Knights score
The NBN Soccer League up in Newcastle, the Hunter and Lake Macquarie has always become huge. But also the grand final last week between Broadmeadow and Western was of course the best. With Broadmeadow securing the victory and the win, as well as the premiership. Also, it's been a really hard time for plenty of clubs, and of course, a new club is joining next season with South Cardiff joining the NBN State League, with South Cardiff joining the NBN Soccer League in 1998. It was a huge one last week with the grand final between Broadmeadow and Western. It was of course played between those two. The Knights had to go straight onto the bus and were bound for Sydney by coach Malcolm Reilly. It was part of the finals. First up against Parramatta, then in a major semi-final against Manly. In the grand final of the Newcastle Rules AFL for 1997, both Cardiff and Warners Bay played against each other. And because of that, both teams kicked goals. But also, there can only be one winner, and that of course was Warners Bay. And of course, Warners Bay, the 1997 Newcastle Rules AFL premiers. Thankfully, I'm not doing something which is scary, but of course, the grand final of the Hunter Cup of Newcastle hockey began. They only had to have one team to secure a victory. The home crowd quickly quickly gathered to see Western Suburbs secure a huge victory over Lakes United into the 1997 Rugby League Grand Final. Because of that, Western Suburbs were the first to score. Then scored more. Before there were plenty more coming above. And of course, West had denied Lakes United the chance of back-to-back premierships. Then both teams had players sent from the field because of back chats, as well as swearing at each other. But also, both teams scored, but thankfully, West United, but thankfully there can only be one winner. Western Suburbs, the 1997 Newcastle Rugby League Grand Final champions. The grand final of the NBN Soccer League all became huge. Broadmeadow took on Western. In a replay of 2 years ago, Singleton were up against Muswellbrook into the Newcastle and Hunter Rugby Union Grand Final. But of course it was Muswellbrook's turn to secure revenge.
Now, from the try line, now we were trying to rough it out. Oh, gets almost
Now it was time to... Then it was of course in the Group 19 Grand Final where of course Waywar had secured a Grand Final spot.
The try coming in, oh, good try in the centre of the field, 30 metres outside, it goes away to Knight to Hogan, Hogan in a bit of a gap, he's over! Try to the pass, rhyme a rhythm to the attack, but they managed to make plenty of inroads. Referee says yes!
And of course, their rivals tried to have a comeback, but it was just too late.
Very even game at the moment. As Man makes half a break. The scrum to Crossfield, it goes to Crookshank, it goes to Billy Knight. Knight a long pass out to the winger, Hillison heading for the try, that's a try! The points on the board, they've been there just too long. Now a pass comes down and that's a try to the wing walk the hole, now he gets passed away to Corey Wilson.
But of course,
Holland try for Bill Parsons, I think it is. Sullivan away to Richie Porter. Porter across field. Here's a try coming up to Billy Parsons, try number 3. That might win the grand final. He's the Billy Knight field goal. It's there. 25 all.
then a field goal came above. The action continued. Then, of course, the battle continued. There was no bad news for Andrew Johns. Despite having an injury after scoring a try in a qualifying final game against Parramatta. The good news is, Johns, of course, is only on the bench for the night's semi-final clash against Manly. The other players were also playing golf. That, of course, was part of the week off, while their coach Malcolm Reilly was looking on in good smiles. the Knights will take on Manly in the major semi. West was still celebrating after winning the 1997 Newcastle Rugby League Grand Final. That, of course, was to deny Lakes United a chance to secure back-to-back premierships. And because of that, good news for Western Suburbs, they had the best opportunities to quickly celebrate. And also, not only just that, it was of course to have fun. The match between Maitland and Singleton was of course the one to be on. And of course, Maitland, the ones in the black, were up against Singleton in the red and black. And of course, Singleton scored the first try in the Newcastle and Hunter Rugby Union final. Even though Maitland scored one early, but it was disallowed. Then, Singleton scored one as well. Meanwhile, everyone didn't mind a lot of good chats. Meanwhile, Singleton had a player to have a rest. And of course, Singleton, the 1997 Newcastle and Hunter Rugby Union premiers. It was tough up at the International Hockey Centre at Broadmeadow. Both sides were struggling at first. But effectively, one found the back of the net. Despite the win over Parramatta in the minor qualifying final, the Knights were still bruised and sore. And of course, the Knights were also on their way to the X-rays. It's because it's all part of the major semi-final clash against Manly. They also had to take boxing lessons as part of their training skills. And of course, the Knights players know a lot about a rivalry between Newcastle and North Sydney. But if Newcastle is defeated by Manly, there'll be good news for the Knights. They're not out of the finals. There's still a lot of sore heads for the Knights despite losing to Manly in a major semi-final. And also, because of that, Coach Malworley now knows it's time to face the Bears in the preliminary final. But also, the main way is the trip up to North Sydney. Well, Andrew John's only out for a week due to injury, but thankfully, he's coming back. Before leaving for Sydney today, the Knights players had one final opportunity to sign autographs to their fans. And also Newcastle were wearing old shirts back from their previous years. It's all part of their clash with their rivals, the North. It's all part of the clash with the North Sydney Bears. With a lot of good news coming into local hockey, it's also becoming really good. And of course, in a grand final, if it's in the Newcastle competition, Knights fans still had every right to celebrate after the club's victory in the preliminary final against the North Sydney Bears. That, of course, saw Newcastle go through to their first ever first grade grand final. And of course, Andrew Johns made a return. And of course, Owen Craigie scored the match-winning try. If everyone is a die-hard Knights fan, they should be. And because of that, it was time to go through to their first ever grand final for 1997. Even though it was really wet, and because of that, it was time to stay indoors instead of outdoors. Andrew Johns left his home just in time to prepare to go to his first ever grand final. And of course, he was to play up in Sydney. Farewelling a legend can be really tough though. And of course,
a great finish, and the Mariners have locked it up at 14 all. You probably hit it right on the head there, Clarkie. You said
that's what occurred for the Hunter Mariners. Good news up in Newcastle baseball, it was just an incredible grand final. Toronto, back to back. And of course, Wall's End were the runners up. The Knights were all but getting ready for their first ever grand final for 1997. And of course, so too was their coach, Malcolm Reilly.
the way he's playing.
Even though they were battered and bruised after the loss to Manly in the semi-final, thankfully, the final season for Newcastle was not done yet. And of course, the lineup remains unchanged. With O'Davis, Albert, McDougall, Craigie, Hughes, the Johns brothers, Glanville, Muir, Peden, Harrigan, Clement and Butterfield all on. So too is Richards, Fletcher, Crowe, Denver, Jackson, Conley, Cochran and Moody all on the reserves. Denver has been dropped to the bench. The grand final is also like Adam Muir's and Mark Glanville's last final game. Thousands of locals across Newcastle supporting the red and blue Knights. Of course, go inside the local shopping centres, all but painting everything red and blue just to support our army of Knights.
The Knights to win, isn't it?
And of course, it was to make sure that our Knights win the 97 grand final. And of course, they had to quickly rewrite it as to the Knights. And of course, the Knights had had a booked at a bus to Sydney. So too did their coach, Malcolm Reilly. And of course, the training sessions were, their final training session was over. With the Sid Fogg's bus leaving, it was of course one more goodbye. As part of their last training session, the Knights were up in their dressing room at Mayfield. They were still riding on bikes, and so too was Coach Malcolm Reilly. Also, the run-on for the first grade in the grand final will be O'Davis, Albert, McDougall, Craigie, Hughes and the Johns brothers, as well as Glanville, Muir, Richards, Harrigan, Peden, Butterfield and Denver. Also, Fletcher, Conley, Clements, Jackson, Crow, Grogan, Matthew Gidley, Moody and Cochrane. Meanwhile, the Knights posed for one last photo before going off to Sydney to go through to the grand final. The Knights got through to the grand final, but it was their reserve grade side that secured a victory back in 1995. Now, 1997 is hoping to be the year of their first grade. They'll take on Manly this Sunday. The Knights having one more final conversation, it will be huge. With Newcastle, and of course, the news will officially be, can they shatter Manly's chance of claiming back-to-back titles? Yes, they can. Andrew Johns left his home just about this afternoon, and because of that, he's about to head off to his first ever first grade grand final. But also, but before that, he was right up at the Lake Macquarie Private Hospital. It's all part of Sunday's grand final against Manly. One last training session for the Knights. And of course, John's of course, all right and okay to play. The Knights had to be quickly. The Knights had to sign autographs for the last time, and because of that, they had to travel down to Sydney. And also, their fans had to get tickets to go through, and also they had to wave goodbye to the Knights before they headed down to Sydney to go straight to the Sydney Football Stadium, where they had to meet their enemy, Manly Warringah, into Sunday's grand final. Also, the one thing that they cannot deny is, of course, a party. But of course, but thankfully, locals across the Hunter were still doing everything. And we're doing red and blue decorations in traditional night style as part of the streamers. Bad news for the Knights ahead of this Sunday's grand final, Leo Denver is out. Rarely has dropped Denver, Malcolm really has dropped Denver to the bench. That's all because of Denver's injury. But of course the Knights had one final look at Marathon Stadium this morning. They started training. Then one last meet and greet before leaving. As it was time to beat their rivals as part of revenge in the grand final, which will occur this Sunday. Good news for Knights fans. Dressed up in their red and blue squad, they're supporting the local side. And of course, the men's hairdressers are also supporting the Knights. And of course, it's to support them as they got through to the grand final. So too is Dick Smith Electronics. The bread was painted in signature red and blue Knights colours as part of this Sunday's grand final between them and Manly. It was right up at the local hot bread shop. It also happened up at local shopping centres, right in the sausages. As well was with hair and balloons as well. Also, everyone sang along. Meanwhile, everything else was also done red and blue, as the Knights managed to beat the North Sydney Bears in the preliminary final. Also, cakes were also done in red and blue style. And of course, one said, "Go Knights, go!" So too were the drinks, as they were done red and blue. The Newcastle hockey is of course the best, and of course seeing women playing in it is of course can be a bit hard though. And of course, one team of course wins. That of course was in a grand final that occurred this afternoon. And that came on after the men's. And of course, it was spectacular. With the grand final right on this Sunday is to be Newcastle or Manly's victory in the grand final. And of course, it's Newcastle's 10th year into the New South Wales Rugby League competition. The Knights have been training so hard this week, and of course they've been doing that since qualifying for the grand final after thrashing North Sydney in the preliminary final. One of Newcastle's players, Darren Albert, knows exactly how to do everything, and he certainly knows why. And also, the grand final will be both Adam Muir and Mark Granville's last as Knights players. it was one more time, and of course it was up at Jasmine that of course Matthew Johns arrived. And of course it was to sign autographs. It was time to sign autographs. That of course was before the Knights had to head off to Sydney to beat Manly in the grand final. Also, everyone had their entire shirts covered with Knights colours. Also, everyone was counting down to the big one. 100% excited, they headed off to the bus, travelling to Sydney for the Optus Cup Grand Final. But for some, they painted their house red and blue. It's been a really tough year for the Hunters mining industry, but however, after news broke that BHP was to close in late 1999, it devastated Newcastle. And of course, it also devastated Newcastle's mining industry. But thankfully, the one thing that, of course, is not devastating was, of course, Matthew Johns kicking a field goal to get the Knights into their first ever Optus Cup Grand Final. If the Knights win, they'll have a home parade as well as a welcome back reception. It was one huge one, as the Knights had an incredible chance. It was time to say thanks and goodbye. And of course, Wally Lewis was up on the stage. Marvellous news. For Knights fans, local shops were still having red and blue Knights army gear, and that of course was part of Sunday's grand final. Right up against Manly in the Optus Cup. Newcastle is now the last team into the grand final. And of course, Newcastle is in second on the ladder, while Manly is in first. It's the first time that Newcastle has gone through to a first grade grand final. And of course, there'll be more until at least October.
Newcastle.
Our first premiership one was a huge success for the Knights. A ticker tape parade was all the Knights' idea.
There's a number of people encouraged by reports that there's an anonymous millionaire businessman who stayed together in spite of a number of offers that have...
It follows the Knights' historic 22-16 win over Manly in Sunday's Optus Cup Grand Final. And of course, because of that, it will of course be attended by lots and lots of Knights fans. It will of course go from Pacific Park to the Hunter Street Mall to City Hall. It's also becoming huge for the Knights, winning the Optus Cup Premiership for the first time. And of course, it's becoming really good for the Knights, premiers for the first time in their career. Conklin McLeod, NBN News. It was exciting news as the Knights came home with the Optus Cup. Fingernails painted in red and blue, so too were faces and toenails as well. With the Knights arriving home after their historic victory in the Optus Cup Grand Final, and of course Darren Albert scoring the match winner of the afternoon. And of course Matthew Johns signing autographs. And of course the Knights arrived back home for the first time since the weekend. Thankfully, more good news had arrived. With the entire Knights right on stage. And of course called, that included the Johns brothers. With a local crowd cheering, it was just fantastic as Darren Albert was greeted. Also, Mark Hughes was also onto the good smiles following the Knights' victory. With that said, it was huge for Darren Albert. Knights fans still in awe and excitement. Andrew Johns was still celebrating. 1997 is the year of the Knights, and because of that, it certainly is. After their tumult, after their incredible grand final victory against the Manly on Sunday, they were of course given a ticker tape. They were of course given a ticker tape parade back home to Newcastle. One of the best of all time. The match was also the last game for Adam Muir and Mark Glanville. But of course, it's not the end of the Johns brothers. And of course, this year is of course the Newcastle Knights. And of course, it's their Optus Cup. And of course, 1997 is the Knights' year, following their win over Manly. Then of course, don't forget, 2022 was also this year for our Knights women. Anyway, that's it for now. My name's Conklin McLeod. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.